He was the Trident, the ruthless ruler of New York's underworld. Tonight, his father, the true Don from Sicily, had come to judge him. The room was frozen in fear. Men worth billions were afraid to breathe. Then she walked in, the shy waitress, the one nobody ever saw. She approached the old Don, the killer of killers, and when she spoke, it wasn't English. It was a deep, ancient Sicilian dialect, and with 5 words, she sealed her fate and brought the entire Salvatore empire to its knees. What did she say? And who was she? Stick around. This isn't just a story, it's a blood debt. The restaurant, Il Sovrano, was a fortress disguised as heaven. Located on a discreet, cobblestone street in Soho, its name meant the Sovereign, and it treated its clientele as such. Senators dined beside hedge fund titans, and movie stars felt lucky to get a reservation. But the staff, and indeed all of New York, knew who the real sovereign was. Nico, the Trident, Salvatore. He owned the building, the block, and half the politicians who ate there. Nico was a man carved from modern granite. Sharp Armani suits, a $5,000 haircut, and eyes as cold and grey as the Atlantic. He was the new generation of Cosa Nostra, a CEO with a body count, and Il Sovrano was his throne room. And then there was Alessia. Alessia Bianchi was a ghost in this gilded cage. She was small, quiet, and possessed a talent for being invisible. Her black uniform was immaculate, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, and her face, pretty in a soft, unassuming way, was always tilted toward the floor. She was the definition of shy waitress, a background detail in a world of blinding power. She needed this job. The anonymity was her shield. The money, which was excellent, was her escape fund. Tonight, the air in Il Sovrano wasn't just tense, it was vibrating. The kitchen was silent, save for the sharp clack of knives. The maître d', a perpetually stressed man named Robert, looked pale enough to faint. Even Nico Salvatore, who was holding court at his usual table 1, the one with a clear view of both entrances and a reinforced wall behind it, seemed on edge. He was waiting for his father. Don Vincenzo Salvatore was not a man. He was a legend, a myth from the old country. He was the capo di tutti capi of Palermo, a figure of such archaic and brutal power that even his own son, the Trident of New York, was still just a picciotto in his shadow. He had not set foot on American soil in 20 years. His arrival was not a social call. It was an inspection, an audit of blood and loyalty. "You," Robert snapped, his finger jabbing at Alessia. "The private dining room, table 7, tonight." Alessia's blood ran cold. The private room? That was reserved for Nico's most sensitive meetings. She had actively avoided it for a year. "Me? But Robert, I thought Maria was—" "Maria," Robert hissed, "spilled a drop of Barolo near Mr. Salvatore's cousin last week. She's cleaning glassware in the basement. You are quiet. You are fast. You do not exist. Do you understand me? You are a pair of hands. Nothing more. Go." Alessia swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded, her hands trembling so hard she had to clench them behind her back. At 9 p.m., they arrived. The front doors of Il Sovrano were closed to the public. Nico Salvatore stood at the entrance, a posture of respect he showed for no one else. 2 black sedans, models that looked more armored than civilian, glided to the curb. Don Vincenzo Salvatore emerged. He was shorter than his son, perhaps in his late 70s, but he seemed to take up more space. He wore a dark, heavy wool suit that had been fashionable in 1980. His face was a map of Sicilian sun and old-world suspicion, dominated by a formidable nose and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light. He didn't walk. He glided, his hand resting on a simple, gnarled wooden cane. Beside Nico were his top lieutenants, Luca, the snake Rinaldi, the slim, smiling consigliere who never blinked, and Marco the bull Gallo, a man who looked like he'd been built out of spare boulders. They were a portrait of modern Mafia power. Don Vincenzo ignored them all. He walked past his son, giving him only a curt nod, and entered the restaurant. He didn't look at the priceless art or the crystal chandeliers. He simply sniffed the air, as if tasting the restaurant's legitimacy. "He's in the room," Robert whispered to Alessia, shoving a silver tray into her hands. "Water. Still. No ice. And do not speak unless spoken to." Alessia's heart hammered against her ribs. She balanced the tray, the crystal glasses rattling softly. She pushed open the heavy oak door to the private room. The air was thick with smoke and testosterone. Don Vincenzo was seated at the head of the long table. Nico sat to his right, looking like a prince, begging for approval. Luca and Marco flanked them. Alessia moved to the table, her eyes locked on the polished wood. She poured the water for Don Vincenzo first. Her hand was steady, a small miracle. She moved to pour for Nico. "So," Don Vincenzo said. His voice was a low rumble, like gravel in a tomb. He wasn't speaking English. He wasn't even speaking proper Italian. He was speaking the deep, guttural, almost Arabic-inflected dialect of Palermo, he said, gesturing dismissively at the opulent room. "All this, it is yours." Nico stiffened. He replied in a cleaner, more academic Italian, his American accent detectable. "Yes, father. I built it for the family." Don Vincenzo's lip curled in a tiny, almost imperceptible sneer. He hated the clean Italian. It was the language of the politicians in Rome who stole from them. It was not the language of their people. "You built this," the Don said in Sicilian, "with American money. It is soft, like you." Nico's face tightened. "The times are different, father." "The times do not change," the Don grunted. "Men do. They become weak." He turned his gaze to his son's lieutenants. "You surround yourself with bambini." Luca Rinaldi, the snake, smiled his oily smile. "With respect, Don Salvatore, our reach is global. We have interests in—" Don Vincenzo held up a single, liver-spotted hand. Silence fell. He had not given Luca permission to speak. The consigliere's blood drained from his face. The Don looked around the table. He seemed deeply, profoundly disappointed. He felt alien, surrounded by men who had forgotten their roots. He pushed his water glass away in disgust. "Water! Like a child," he muttered in dialect. He looked up, his black eyes landing on Alessia as she stood by the wall, waiting to be dismissed. He saw her only as a piece of furniture. He barked at her, not at his son. "Wine. Red. One that tastes of earth, not of smoke." Immediately, Alessia froze. This was the moment, the pivot point of her entire life. She was supposed to nod, terrified, and fetch Robert. She was supposed to be invisible. But the words he spoke, they were the language of her grandmother, the language of her childhood nightmares and her secret lullabies, the language she hadn't spoken aloud in a decade. Nico, embarrassed, began to translate. "He wants wine. Red. I heard him," Alessia said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the cigar smoke like a razor. Nico's head snapped toward her. Luca and Marco stared. Alessia took one step forward, away from the wall. She was no longer a ghost. She looked directly into the black, merciless eyes of Don Vincenzo Salvatore. She dipped her head, not in a servile bow, but in a gesture of ancient, formal respect. And then, in the same pure, low, gravelly Palermo dialect that the Don himself had used, she replied, "Good day, Don Vincenzo." The effect was instantaneous. It was as if a grenade had been rolled silently onto the table. If Alessia had pulled a gun, the reaction could not have been more immediate. Marco Gallo, the bull, a man who had famously survived a car bomb, actually flinched, his hand dropping to the weapon beneath his jacket. Luca Rinaldi's slick smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure reptilian shock. His mouth hung open slightly. Nico Salvatore went pale. His disbelief was absolute. He looked at Alessia as if she had suddenly grown a second head. He stared at this shy waitress, this girl he'd barely registered as human, this creature who cleaned his crumbs, and heard the impossible. It wasn't just that she spoke the dialect. It was how. She didn't speak it with the clumsy, hesitant tongue of a student. She spoke it with the terror, the earth, that the Don had just demanded. Her pronunciation was flawless, invoking the narrow, sun-baked alleys of Palermo, the salt of the sea, the blood in the soil. It was a language of secrets, one meant to exclude the outside world, and she spoke it like she was born to it. But it was Don Vincenzo's reaction that held the room in a vice. The old man had not moved, not a muscle, but his eyes, which had been dull with disdain, suddenly ignited. They became sharp, focused, and lethal. He stared at Alessia, his gaze so intense it was a physical weight, pinning her to the spot. Alessia's heart was a trapped bird against her ribs, but she held his gaze. She had stepped off the cliff. There was no going back. She continued in the dialect, her voice steady, respectful, but infused with a strength that belied her trembling hands. My name is Alessia. It is a true honor to serve you tonight. She then added the line that shattered the silence. I remember the wine that a man of respect likes, a wine from our land, one that has not abandoned its roots. It was a direct, breathtaking echo of the Don's own complaint. She hadn't just understood him, she had agreed with him, and in doing so had subtly validated his disgust with the soft American room. Nico Salvatore, fluent in boardroom Italian, but a clumsy tourist in his father's dialect, understood enough to know he had just been insulted by his own waitress, and worse, his father had just been flattered by her. What the hell is this? Nico snapped in English, his voice a low growl. Alessia, get out! Alessia didn't look at him. Her focus was absolute. It was only on the Don. Don Vincenzo raised a single, wrinkled finger, silencing his son without a glance. Nico's jaw clamped shut, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He had been publicly overridden. The old Don leaned forward. The silence in the room was so deep, Alessia could hear the fizz of the candle wicks. He spoke, his voice softer now, but infinitely more dangerous. You, little one. He studied her face, his eyes narrowing. Where do you come from? Who taught you to speak like that? This is not the tongue of a waitress. He was testing her. He was asking for her lineage, her city, her family. In their world, this was the only question that mattered. Alessia knew she was walking a tightrope over a canyon. She had to give him an answer that was both true and a lie. I come from here, Don Salvatore, she replied in Sicilian, but my grandmother was from Corleone. She never spoke a word of English to me. She said the old words had more power. She taught me to respect the men who, like the wine, have not abandoned their roots. Corleone. The name hung in the air, thick with a history of blood and iron. It was a name of respect, a heartland of the old ways. The Don's expression was unreadable. He saw her simple black uniform, her clean, unadorned face, and the blazing, terrified intelligence in her eyes. He saw a contradiction that fascinated him. Luca Rinaldi, recovering his composure, decided to intervene. He saw a potential threat, an unknown variable, Patri, Luca said, attempting the dialect and failing, his voice sounding thin and weak after Alessia's. She is a servant. She is playing a game. Perhaps she learned a few phrases to— Silenzio! The Don roared. The word cracked like a whip. Luca flinched as if struck. Don Vincenzo's eyes never left Alessia's. He saw the subtle contempt in her expression as she glanced at Luca. The contempt of a true speaker for a fraud. A slow, reptilian smile spread across the old Don's face. It was not a kind smile. It was a smile of discovery, of acquisition. You, he said to Alessia, pointing a finger. You will bring the wine, the one you choose, and you will pour it. He then looked at his son, Nico. And this Picciridda, she will serve my table. Only her. For the rest of the night. Do you understand? Nico Salvatore, the Trident, the King of New York, could only nod. Yes, father. The Don waved his hand, dismissing his son and his lieutenants. But not Alessia. Leave me, all of you. I will speak with the girl. I want to know about the wine. The order was a tactical bomb. He had dismissed his own son, the Don of New York, but kept the waitress. It was a calculated humiliation, a demonstration of absolute power. Nico's face was a mask of cold fury. He stood up. Luca and Marco followed, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. They filed out of the room, leaving the most powerful man in the Mafia alone with the shy waitress. The heavy door clicked shut. Alessia was alone, with Don Vincenzo Salvatore. He gestured to the chair beside him, his son's chair. Sit, he commanded in Sicilian. Her legs felt like water, but she did as he said. She sat at the table, a servant in the seat of power. The old Don leaned back, his ancient eyes scrutinizing her, peeling back her layers. The girl from Corleone, he mused, his voice a predator's purr. It is a town of strong secrets. And you, Alessia Bianchi, you are full of them. Now, tell me, who are you? The private dining room at Il Sovrano was designed to be soundproof. Outside that door, Nico Salvatore was pacing, his controlled fury radiating in waves. He was humiliated, confused, and dangerously intrigued. His father, the man he'd spent his life trying to impress, had kicked him out of his own inner sanctum in favor of a waitress. Inside, the silence was a different animal. It was the patient, ancient silence of a predator. Alessia sat on the edge of the plush, crimson velvet chair, her back straight. She was no longer a waitress. She was a player in a game she had trained for her entire life. I am as I said, Don, she replied in the deep dialect. My name is Alessia Bianchi. My grandmother was Angelica, from the hills outside Corleone. She was feeding him a curated truth. Her grandmother was named Angelica. She was from those hills. But Bianchi was a lie. It was the name of a ghost, a name she'd adopted to erase her own. Angelica, Vincenzo mused, tapping his cane on the marble floor. I knew many from Corleone, the Bianchi family. I do not recall them. Were they farmers? Bakers? They were nothing, Don, Alessia said, lowering her eyes. They were not amici nostri, friends of ours. They were just people. She fled to America after the war, with nothing. She died when I was young. And she taught you the tongue of kings, Vincenzo finished, his gaze sharp. She taught you respect, a lesson my son, with all his tall buildings and expensive suits, seems to have forgotten. He was using her. He was already using her as a weapon against his own son. Alessia understood this. It was the first move in his own game. She taught me that roots are all that matter, Alessia said softly. She said a tree with no roots is just a piece of wood, waiting to be burned. Vincenzo's eyes flared. That was an old proverb. A very old proverb. He hadn't heard it in 30 years. A sudden cold suspicion entered his mind. He looked at her face. Really looked at her, searching past her youth and her simple features. He was looking for a ghost. "Your eyes," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "What was your grandmother's family name? Before she was married?" Alessia's heart stopped. This was the question, the one that could get her killed. I do not know, Don. She never spoke of it. She said it was a name of sorrow." Vincenzo stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He saw the flicker in her pulse, the way her hand, resting on the table, was perfectly still. Too still. He suspected she was lying, but he was captivated by the quality of the lie. "Go," he said abruptly, his voice hard again. "Bring me the wine, the one you promised, the one with roots." Alessia stood. She gave him the same respectful nod. "Si, Don Vincenzo." She walked to the door, her spine rigid. As her hand touched the brass handle, he spoke again. "From now on, Picturida, you do not serve anyone else. You are not a waitress. You are my translator. My son's American tongue is an insult. You will be my voice." She nodded, not daring to speak, and slipped out the door. The hallway felt like a war zone. Nico was there, as she knew he would be. Luca and Marco were 10 feet behind him, trying to look casual and failing. Nico grabbed her arm. His grip was steel. He spun her around and slammed her against the flocked wallpaper. His handsome face was dark with a rage that was part jealousy, part suspicion. "What game are you playing?" he hissed in English. "Who are you? What did you say to him?" Alessia had faced the Capo di Tutti Capi. His son, for all his power, was just a shadow. She looked at the hand on her arm. Then she looked into his cold, grey eyes. The shy waitress was gone. The woman who had just survived the Don was in her place. "Take your hand off me, Don Salvatore," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was not soft. Nico was so surprised. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She wrenched her arm free. "I am playing no game," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am here to serve. Your father asked me a question. I answered it, in a language he respects." She let the barb hang in the air. "You are a nobody," Luca Rinaldi sneered, stepping forward. "A little rat." "What did you tell him?" Alessia turned her gaze on Luca. "I told him the truth, consigliere. Perhaps you should try it. He might find it refreshing." Luca's face went purple. Marco took a step, his hand balling into a fist. "Basta!" Nico commanded. He was looking at Alessia with new, confused eyes. The fear he expected to see in her was gone. It had been replaced by something else. Something he hadn't seen in a long time. Contempt. "What did he want?" Nico demanded, his voice strained. "He wants wine," Alessia said, smoothing her uniform. "And I am to be his translator. He finds your Italian lacking." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked down the hall toward the wine cellar, her steps measured and confident. She left Nico Salvatore standing in the hallway of his own restaurant, his 2 most dangerous men at his side, all of them staring after her, completely and utterly thrown off their axis. Nico watched her go, his mind racing. Who was she? A spy from another family? A plant? A simple waitress who just happened to know a near-dead dialect? No. He didn't believe in coincidences. He turned to Luca. His voice was ice. "Find out who she is. I don't mean her name. I mean who she is. I want to know where she was born. I want to know the name of her grandmother's dog. I want to know what she ate for breakfast. I want everything. Now." Luca Rinaldi, the snake, nodded. "Consider it done, boss." But as Luca walked away, a new thought entered his mind. The Don had taken a liking to this girl. The Don was old world. If this girl was special, she could become a new power center, a threat to his position. Luca decided he wouldn't just find out who she was. He would find a way to use her, or, if necessary, a way to remove her. Alessia walked into the cavernous wine cellar, the chill air a balm on her burning skin. She leaned against a rack of priceless Bordeaux, her legs finally giving out. She was shaking from head to toe. She had done it. Phase 1 was complete. She had the Don's attention. She thought of the face of Don Vincenzo, searching her own. He was looking for the ghost. He was looking for the Rossi family. He was looking for his past. He'll find it, she whispered into the cool, damp air. And it will be the end of him. She selected a bottle, a 1985 Taurasi, a deep, earthy, powerful wine from the south, a wine with roots. She composed herself, picked up the silver tray, and walked back to the lion's den, ready for the next move. For the next 3 days, Il Sovrano was a court in flux. The power dynamic had been shattered. Alessia was no longer Alessia Bianchi, the waitress. She was l'ombra del Don, the Don's shadow. She was at Don Vincenzo's side from the moment he woke until he retired. She sat in on meetings with Nico's capos, a silent figure standing behind the old man's chair, translating Nico's modern business speak and quarterly projections into the Sicilian dialect of blood, territory, and honor. And she translated the Don's replies. "My father says," she would state to a room of hardened killers, her voice calm, "that your logistical efficiencies sound like the excuses of a man who is afraid to get his hands dirty. He asks if you have forgotten that loyalty is not found on a balance sheet." Nico's men began to despise her. She was the vessel for the old Don's criticisms, and her perfect, respectful delivery made it all the more infuriating. Luca Rinaldi watched her with a venomous intensity, his investigation into her Alessia Bianchi identity yielding nothing. The woman had no past, no family, no social media, no credit history before 2 years ago. She was, just as her fake name suggested, white, a blank slate, a ghost. Nico, however, was a different story. His fury had curdled into a complex, dangerous obsession. He watched her. He watched the way she moved, the way she spoke to his father with a respect she never afforded him. He watched the way his father, in turn, seemed to relax around her, speaking of his olive groves in Palermo, asking her questions about obscure saints' days. Nico found himself listening to the sound of the dialect. It was a language he'd always associated with his father's disapproval, but from her lips it sounded different, ancient, melodic. He cornered her on the 3rd night. His father had finally retired. Alessia was in the small staff room, unpinning her hair, the long, dark waves tumbling down her back. She thought she was alone. The door locked. She spun around. Nico Salvatore stood there, leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. The mask of the CEO was gone. He looked like the street-raised brawler he truly was. "The show's over," he said, his voice low. "No audience, no father, just you and me." Alessia's hand instinctively went to the locker behind her, where she kept her bag. "I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" He took a step closer. The room was tiny, filled with the smell of industrial soap and her faint, clean scent. "You've had fun, haven't you? Making me look like a fool in my own house, humiliating me in front of my men." "I have done only as your father commanded," Alessia said, lifting her chin. "My father is an old man obsessed with the past," Nico growled, taking another step. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He sees a pretty girl who can speak his dead language, and he's enchanted. But I'm not. I see a liar. What do you want, Mr. Salvatore? I want the truth. Luca's investigation came up with nothing. Alessia Bianchi doesn't exist. So I did my own digging. Alessia's blood chilled. I didn't look for Bianchi, he said, his grey eyes pinning her. I looked for Angelica from Corleone. I looked for women who fled Sicily in the late 90s, who had a child. And I found a name that was supposed to be erased, a name that hasn't been spoken in my family's presence for 30 years. He was so close now, he was almost whispering. I found a record of a woman named Angelica Rossi, who entered America through a charity organization, pregnant, claiming her husband had died in a farming accident. She died in poverty in Queens, but her child survived. Alessia was barely breathing. The name was out. Rossi. That name means nothing to me, she lied, but her voice wavered. Liar, he whispered. I know that name. Every mafioso in Sicily knows that name. The Rossi family. The only family that ever made my father's generation tremble. The family my father's associates wiped out, annihilated. Every man, woman, and child, or so they thought. He reached out and, with a single finger, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her skin burned at his touch, but she flinched as if he'd struck her. They missed one, he breathed, his eyes tracing her features. They missed a baby girl. And now I look at you, and I see it. You don't have your grandmother's eyes, do you? You have your grandfather's eyes. Don Franco Rossi, my father's greatest rival. Alessia's facade crumbled. The terror, the grief, and the white-hot rage of a lifetime flooded her face. My full name, she spat, her voice thick with venom, is Alessia Costanza Rossi, and your father is a mattalaio, a butcher. He murdered my grandfather. He murdered my uncles. He ordered the death of my mother while I was in her womb. He stole our land, our honor, and our name. Nico staggered back, as if she had physically pushed him. The confirmation hit him like a freight train. This wasn't a spy. This wasn't a game. This was a blood feud. You're here for revenge, he stated. It wasn't a question. You're here to kill him. He deserves to die, she whispered, tears of fury tracing paths down her cheeks. He deserves to die for what he did to my family, to my mother, who spent her entire life scrubbing floors and looking over her shoulder, terrified that his dogs would find us. So, the dialect, the shy act, it was all a trap, to get close to him. It was the only weapon I have left, she cried, her voice breaking. The language he used to steal my past is the language I will use to end his future. Nico stared at her, his mind a whirlwind. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. And she was, by every law of their world, his sworn enemy. He was bound by omertà to kill her where she stood. His father's life was on the line. But as he looked at her, trembling with a rage that matched his own, he didn't feel duty. He felt admiration. And something else. A dark, possessive pull that he had been fighting for 3 days. He, too, had lived his whole life in his father's shadow, suffocated by the old ways he didn't fully understand. And here was a woman who had mastered those ways, not to serve them, but to destroy them. He will find you out, Nico said, his voice raw. He's not a fool. He's already suspicious. He's looking for the Rossi ghost. He'll put it together. Let him, Alessia said, wiping her face. I'm not afraid of him. You should be. Nico took a step, closing the distance again. The energy between them was electric, a mix of hatred and a volatile, undeniable attraction. He's my father. My duty is to him. I should walk out that door and tell him there is a Rossi in his house, and let him put a bullet in your head. Then do it, she challenged, her dark eyes flashing. Or are you, like he said, too soft? That was the spark. Nico moved so fast she didn't have time to react. He didn't hit her. He didn't grab her. He pressed her back against the lockers, one hand bracing the metal by her head, his body caging hers. His face was inches from hers. Don't, he whispered, ever call me soft. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the conflict in his storm-grey eyes. He was the son of her family's killer, and she had never felt more alive. What's the plan, Alessia Rossi? He murmured. A knife? Poison in his wine? You're the one serving him after all. You don't want to know, she breathed. I think I do. His gaze dropped to her mouth. Because I have a problem. Half of me knows I have to kill you, and the other half wants to watch you succeed. Before she could process the treason in his words, the door to the staff room rattled. A key slid into the lock. Nico and Alessia sprang apart, their expressions shifting to cold neutrality. The door opened. Luca Rinaldi stood there, a thin, triumphant smile on his face. He held a small, manila envelope in his hand. My apologies, boss, Luca said, his eyes sliding from Nico to Alessia and back, noting their proximity, their flushed faces. But my associate in Palermo finally came through. I thought you'd want to see this immediately. Luca's smile widened. He tapped the envelope. It's funny what you find when you stop looking for Bianchi and start looking for ghosts. I found an old baptismal certificate. For one, Alessia Costanza Rossi, and a photograph of her grandfather, Don Franco. He pulled the old black and white photo from the envelope and held it up. Then he looked at Alessia. The resemblance is uncanny. Luca's eyes met Nico's. The challenge was clear. Luca had found the truth too. So, boss, Luca said, his voice dripping with false loyalty. What do we do with the last of the Rossi? The staff room, which had just been a crucible of confession, instantly became an executioner's block. Nico Salvatore's face was unreadable. He had been caught confronting his enemy, caught, hesitating. Luca Rinaldi, the snake, knew he had his boss in a corner. His loyalty was never to Nico, but to the Omerta, the iron-clad code of the old world. And Omerta demanded only one thing for a Rossi who threatened a Salvatore: death. She's a spy, Luca stated, his voice ringing with self-righteousness. She played you. She played your father. She is here to murder the Don. Alessia stood her ground, her mind racing. Nico's reaction was everything. Would he save her? Would he condemn her? Nico looked at Luca, his grey eyes as cold as a winter tomb. You did good work, Luca. You found the rat. Alessia's heart plummeted. Rat. He was siding with his consigliere. He was siding with his blood. Of course, boss, Luca said, puffing up. I'll have Marco take her to the river. No one will ever... No. Nico's voice was quiet, but it stopped Luca cold. You won't have Marco do anything, Nico said, slowly pulling his suit jacket back on, straightening his cuffs. He was the Don again. You will not breathe a word of this. Not to Marco, and especially not to my father. Luca's smile faltered. Boss? With respect, she's a Rossi. It's a blood feud, it's my decision, Nico snapped. This is my city, my restaurant, and my father. I will handle this. Handle her? Luca was incredulous. Nico, she's a threat. The Don's life is my concern, Nico roared. He grabbed Luca by the lapels, slamming him against the lockers. The shift in power was violent and total. You listen to me, consigliere. You are loyal to me, not to my father, not to the old ways. Me. And I give the orders. You will go back out there. You will forget this photograph, and you will forget her name. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will personally cut your tongue out. Am I understood? Luca, his face pale and his eyes wide with a new fear, nodded. Yes, Don. Good, now get out. I'm handling her. Nico released him. Yet, Luca, humiliated and seething, gave Alessia one last, venomous look before backing out of the room and closing the door. The lock clicked. They were alone again. Why? Alessia breathed, her body trembling with adrenaline. You should have let him take me. I told you, Nico said, turning to her. The dangerous energy was back, but it was different. It was focused. Half of me wants to watch you succeed. You're committing treason, she whispered, against your own father. My father's world is dying, Nico said, his voice raw with a lifetime of frustration. He sits in his Sicilian villa, judging me for being soft while I run a global empire. He talks of honor and blood, but he's just a man clinging to a past that's gone. You are the first thing that's made sense in years. What are you talking about? This blood feud, he said, pacing the small room. The Great War of '89, the Rossi Massacre. I grew up hearing about it. It was the foundation of our power. The story was that your grandfather, Don Franco Rossi, betrayed my father, and my father acted. He murdered them, Alessia spat. Yes, he murdered them. He wiped out an entire line. Do you know what that's like? To be the son of that? To know your entire life, your wealth, this restaurant, is built on the bones of children. Alessia was stunned into silence. This was not the man she had planned to hate. I have lived with that blood debt my entire life, Nico continued, his voice dropping. I've been paying for his sins. And then you walk in. The one ghost he missed. You're not just here for your revenge, Alessia. You're here for mine. Your revenge? I hate him, Nico whispered, the confession hanging in the air. I hate what he represents. I hate that he will never see me as anything but a soft American. By protecting you, by letting you get close to him, I'm finally choosing my own side. Alessia saw the truth. He was as much a prisoner as she was. They were both trapped by the same man, by the same bloody history. What? What was your plan? He asked. Poison? A knife? Alessia shook her head. She walked to her locker and opened it. She pulled out her bag. From it, she didn't retrieve a weapon. She retrieved a small, leather-bound journal and a digital voice recorder. My mother died last year, Alessia said, her voice thick. But before she did, she told me everything. She wrote it all down, the names, the dates, the betrayals. My plan wasn't to kill him. Not at first. Then what? I wanted to destroy his legacy. I wanted a confession. I've been serving him, earning his trust, letting him talk about the old days. I've been recording him. She held up the small device. I wanted him to admit, in his own words, what he did. I was going to give it to every newspaper, every federal prosecutor. I wasn't just going to put a bullet in him. I was going to burn his entire world to the ground, erase the Salvatore name, just as he erased the Rossi name. Nico looked at the recorder, then at her. His admiration was palpable. That's so much more brutal than a bullet. It's what he deserves, to die in a cold American prison with no name and no honor. That, she said, her eyes burning, is Sicilian revenge. Nico was silent for a moment. It won't work. What? My father is too smart. He will never, ever confess to that. He'll take that secret to the grave. He'll never give you the satisfaction. He will, Alessia insisted. He's old. He's nostalgic. He likes me. He likes a servant, Nico corrected. The moment he suspects you're an equal, he'll crush you, and we have a new problem. Luca, Alessia said, the name tasting like ash. Luca. Nico nodded. He's not loyal to me. I see that now. He's loyal to the idea of my father. He's an old-world zealot. He won't take her to the river, but he will, 100%, go to my father. He'll wait for the perfect moment, when I'm not there, and he will expose you. He'll save the Don and, in the process, prove me a traitor for hesitating. Then we're finished, Alessia whispered, sinking onto the bench. He'll kill us both. No, Nico said. The decision had settled in his eyes. The conflict was gone. We're not finished. You were right. Your plan is too clean, too American. You can't get a confession. You can't expose him. There's only one way this ends. He reached into his jacket, and for the first time, Alessia saw the gun he always carried, a sleek, black Beretta in a shoulder holster. The old way, Nico said, his voice flat. A blood debt must be paid in blood. You can't kill him. You're a waitress, and he's surrounded by guards. But He looked at her, his face a mask of grim resolve. I can. Alessia stared at him. You would. You would kill your own father? My father died 30 years ago, in that massacre, Nico said. The man upstairs is just a monster. You came here to end the Salvatore line. Fine, let's end it. Together. Tonight. The plan was forged in the cold, sterile light of the staff room, a desperate gambit born of mutual hatred. It was simple, and it was suicidal. Nico laid it out, his voice a low, urgent rasp. My father is at the Pierre. He's old, but he's a fortress. He has his two personal shadows, men from Palermo who would die before letting anyone harm him. They won't let you near him. But they'll let you in, Alessia said, her mind already moving 2 steps ahead. They'll let me in, Nico confirmed. He's expecting me for a final meeting, to discuss the future of the family now that his inspection is over. I'll tell him I have a proposition so sensitive I only trust you to broker it. I'll use your dialect as the key. He'll be suspicious, Alessia countered. He'll be arrogant, Nico shot back. He'll see it as me finally bowing to his ways, using a true Sicilian translator. He'll let you in. Once that door is closed, it's 2-on-1. His shadows will be in the hall. They're good, but they're not faster than a bullet. He paused, his grey eyes locking on hers, the confession laid bare. They'll hear the shot. They'll break down the door. They'll find him dead, and they'll find us. And what happens then? Alessia whispered. I am his son, his heir. Omerta forbids patricide, but it demands vengeance for a Don. I'll tell them you were the assassin, a Rossi ghost, that you played us both, and I was forced to kill you after you shot my father. He didn't flinch. I consolidate my power. I become the Don. The blood feud ends. I walk away, alone. And you become the villain in my new legend. Alessia stared at him, the coldness of his betrayal a fresh slap. No. What? It's the only way we both don't— No! Her voice was quiet but unbreakable. I will not be your scapegoat. I will not trade one monster's reign for another's. I am not a tool for you to consolidate power. My name is Alessia Costanza Rossi. I will not die as a footnote in your story. We do this as equals. We walk out of that room together, or we both die in it. Nico searched her face, looking for a crack, for the fear he expected. He found nothing but iron. A slow, dangerous smile, one of full-blooded admiration, touched his lips. "You really are your grandfather's blood." He nodded, the decision made. "All right, equals. We kill him, and we face his men together. It'll be a slaughter, but we'll be free, or we'll be dead. Either way, the debt is paid." "One thing," Alessia said, her mind racing. "Luca, he'll go to your father the second he can't find you. He'll expose us before we even get in the car." "No, he won't." Nico pulled out his phone, his thumb moving with brutal efficiency. He sent a text to Marco. "The bull Gallo." He pocketed the phone. "I just sent Luca on a one-way trip to a non-existent problem," Nico said. "Marco is a soldier. Luca is a snake. Marco hates snakes. He'll be thrilled to have the consigliere running around the docks for 3 hours while he secures the perimeter. It's the only window we'll get." He offered his hand. "Alessia Costanza Rossi. Are you ready to end this?" She looked at the hand of the man who was her mortal enemy, the man who had just offered to become her partner in treason. She placed her small, trembling hand in his. "I am." The ride to the Pierre was silent, a void of unspoken history and terrible purpose. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of Nico's sedan, each one a potential witness to their conspiracy. The penthouse suite was a palace in the sky, all gilt and marble, overlooking the dark, sprawling lung of Central Park. Don Vincenzo sat in a high-backed chair by the window, a small glass of Amaro in his hand. He looked like an ancient, tired king. His 2 Sicilian bodyguards, impassive and built like vending machines, flanked the door. They eyed Alessia with open suspicion. "Patri," Nico said, bowing his head in a perfect, false show of respect. "I have asked Alessia to join us. I have a sensitive proposal. One I felt more comfortable discussing in the lingua nostra." Vincenzo grunted, his eyes finding Alessia's. "So, the little bird has become a parrot." He waved a dismissive hand. "Let them in. Wait outside." The guards nodded, closing the heavy oak door. The click of the latch sounded like a cell door locking. They were alone. Nico and Alessia advanced. The old Don turned in his chair. "Father," Nico began, his voice steady, "we have a problem, a matter of a blood debt that must be settled." Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. "What debt?" "The debt of the Rossi," Nico said, his hand moving slowly, deliberately, inside his jacket. The Don's face didn't change, but his entire body went rigid. He had been a predator for 70 years. He knew the scent of a trap. "What did you say?" "He found her, father," Nico said, his voice filling with a cold, clear power. "The one you missed, the ghost of Palermo." Alessia stepped forward into the lamplight. The time for games, for dialects, for service, was over. "My name," she said, her voice like ice, "is Alessia Costanza Rossi, granddaughter of Franco Rossi, the man you butchered." The old Don's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of genuine, profound shock. He didn't look at Alessia. He looked at his son. "You," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrible new understanding. "You bring this infamia into my home. You side with her?" "She's here for justice," Nico said, and his hand was no longer in his jacket. It was out, and in it was a sleek, black Beretta, pointed directly at his father's heart. Vincenzo looked at the gun. He looked at his son's face. He looked at Alessia's. And then he did something neither of them expected. He began to laugh. It was not a laugh of mirth. It was a dry, rasping, terrible sound, like stones grinding together. "Justice!" he spat. You children! You come in here with your American guns and your American ideas of justice. You know nothing. I know you killed my family, Alessia screamed, her composure breaking. I did not! The Don roared, slamming his glass down so hard it shattered. I did not give the order for the massacre. Liar! She cried. It was Rinaldi, the Don bellowed, his voice echoing with 30 years of pent-up rage. Antonio Rinaldi, Luca's father. He was my consigliere. He was the one who feared your grandfather. Nico and Alessia froze. You think you're the only ones with secrets? Vincenzo spat, his eyes blazing. Franco Rossi, he was my fratello di sangue, my blood brother. We swore an oath. But Antonio, he was ambitious. He wanted the trade routes Franco controlled. He poisoned my ear, brought me whispers of treason, false letters, paid informants who swore Franco was moving against me. I believed him. The Don's voice broke, thick with an ancient guilt. I sanctioned a removal, a single shot, the old way, a death with honor for my brother. But Antonio, he was a butcher. He used my name and took his own men. He didn't want removal. He wanted annihilation. He wanted the Rossi name gone from the earth. He murdered the children. He was shaking, his face purple. He returned to me, covered in blood, and said the Rossi struck first, that it was a war. By the time I learned the truth, the lie was already legend. I was Don, and my power was built on his sin. I had to wear his crown of infamy. He looked at Alessia, his eyes full of a terrible ancient pain. I saw it. The first night. Why do you think I kept you so close? Your eyes. You have his eyes. Franco's eyes. I didn't see a ghost. I saw my brother. I knew God had sent you. A judgment. After all these years. Suddenly, the door to the suite burst open. It wasn't the guards. It was Luca Rinaldi, his face triumphant, flanked by two of his own men. Marco was nowhere to be seen. Luca had never gone to Brooklyn. He'd been waiting. So it is true, Luca shouted, pulling his own gun. The Trident and the Rossi whore, conspiring to kill the Don. I knew you were soft, Nico. I knew you were a traitor. The standoff was absolute. Luca's gun was trained on Nico. Nico's gun was wavering, still pointed at his father. Alessia was unarmed, caught between 3 generations of lies and blood. Don Vincenzo Salvatore looked at his son, the traitor. He looked at Alessia, the ghost of his brother. And then he looked at Luca, the son of the man who had truly destroyed them all. The old king's face hardened. He had made his choice. The penthouse was violently silent, the air thick with the smell of blood and finality. A sharp knock echoed from the foyer. Is everything all right? Nico Salvatore locked eyes with Alessia. This was the final test. He took a steadying breath, the grief for his father, calcifying into the authority of the Don. He opened the door. The 2 hulking Sicilian guards saw the carnage, their hands flying to their guns as their eyes landed on Alessia. Nico didn't wait. He spoke, and the voice that came out was not his own, but his father's, deep, ancient, and absolute. He commanded in the dialect. He was a traitor, like his father. He came to kill the Don. My father, Nico's voice broke for a perfect, calculated second, fought like a lion. He killed the snake himself before his heart. It gave out. He gestured to Alessia. She saved my life. She saved the family's honor. It was the perfect truth, wrapped in the legend of Omerta. It honored his father, condemned the traitor, and protected his future. The guards saw their new Don, his authority forged in that moment. They bowed their heads. Don Nico, we serve you. After giving the order to clean the mess, Nico took Alessia's hand. They walked out of the hotel, As the first grey light of dawn broke over Manhattan, they stood at the edge of Central Park, the city quiet. "It's over," she whispered. "The feud is," he replied. "My father paid the debt. You're free, Alessia. Your lands in Sicily are waiting. You can go home." She looked at the skyline, then at him. The shy waitress was a ghost. "My home isn't in Sicily," she said, her voice clear. "It's here." Nico saw his future. "My father wanted a Sicilian queen," he said, pulling her close. He spoke of a new family, an alliance, the Salvatore and the Rossi, united. He kissed her, sealing the new dynasty. The next night, Il Sovrano had a new sovereign. Don Nico sat at table 1, and at his right hand, in the seat of power, sat his queen. And just like that, the shy waitress, Alessia Rossi, proved that the old words have power. She didn't just get revenge. She rewrote the entire history of two families and found a love forged in blood and honor. The blood feud is over, but the reign of the new king and queen? It's just beginning. What did you think of Alessia's strategy? Was Nico's betrayal of his father justified, or was the real twist Don Vincenzo's final act? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. This was a long one, and if you stuck with me, you are a true storytelling legend. Thank you so much for listening. Please, if you enjoyed this drama, hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. Share this story with a friend who loves a good twist, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. I post new, long-form stories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you again, and until next time, watch your back.